15.
Thank you. Oliver, you okay? If you can just put on the first slide, please. Is there any way to sharpen the image a little bit? No? Okay, sorry to the audience. I hope you can at least see a little bit from this. Basically, I'm just going to talk about my family tonight and the story, one of the stories from my family. So the woman in the upper left-hand corner is my mother's mother, so it's my grandmother, and she was born in Vienna. She was the first deaf person born in her family, and she came from some money. Her parents were bourgeois in Vienna. Her father was a lawyer, and her mother taught art. So when the Nazis came in, they thought, oh, of course we'll be safe. No one would dare do anything to us since we've reached this level. And they basically stayed in Vienna too long. And my grandmother always had a story about when the Nazis came into her home to take her father away. And what my grandmother did was slap one of the Nazis very hard in the face. And the Nazis were like, okay, well, you're obviously coming with us too. And after they explained, no, she's deaf, she doesn't know any better, the Nazis were like, oh, all right, well, then she can stay here. So that saved her, and that wasn't the only time it saved her. She had a kind of childhood sweetheart, and they remained friends for years and years and years. And actually, he's still a friend of our families. And back then in Vienna, when they were going together as young teens, he would come and visit every day, but there was a curfew at the time. So he had to go home before the curfew every night, but one night he stayed past the curfew and was walking late in the streets, and the Nazis caught him. And he was deaf as well, and they let him go because the excuse was he was deaf, he didn't know any better. So finally, she found a way to escape Vienna. One of her sisters, who was hearing, escaped to LA before that. But my grandmother had met a deaf family, the Saunders family. And they're here, kind of blurrily depicted on the bottom left. And basically, my grandmother had gone to a European deaf sports event where she was swimming the side stroke. And she met this very nice family from London and became good friends with them. And they said, I understand that, something with this thing with Hitler's going on, and if anything happens, please, you're welcome to stay with us. And so when she escaped from Vienna, and no one knows how she escaped, basically, she moved to London and found this family and stayed with them for 20 years. So they basically adopted my grandmother. And their daughter basically became my grandmother's sister. And my grandmother's kind of adopted sister, her daughter, and her family are here with us in the audience. So my grandmother stayed with them for 20 years here in London, and they became family, and they were very happy here in England. She came to love high tea and the Queen and everything else that goes along with that. So after a while, she kind of thought, I really should visit my sister in America, and because she hadn't seen her in over 20 years. So she took the Queen Mary ship over to New York, and then made her way by train to LA, where her sister was living, and decided to just stay with her sister for a little while. I'm going to pause there, and I'm going to transfer over to another story from my family. And this is of my grandfather, who is this man here, this very blurry man. And he was born in New York City. He's also the first deaf person in his family, and the family business was they owned a junkyard in New York City. He worked in the family business, and he also went to the school for the deaf, but the junkyard business, I guess at that time, wasn't doing so well. And so the family decided to move to Detroit, Michigan, because it was kind of the steel belt. It was a good area for those in the junkyard business, apparently. So they moved to Detroit and stayed there. My grandfather graduated from the School for the Deaf in Michigan, played American football, basketball, and just continued to work in the family business. He got married to a deaf woman, but she was not Jewish, which was a big thing. But sure enough, the woman cheated on him, and so they had 3 children together, and of course later he found out that none of them were his. So this was obviously a turning point in his life. He decided to get on a train pronto and just head west to California. But he had no money to do this, and he went ahead and started as a hobo. So here's this deaf hobo with all of these other hearing hobos on the train trying to find food. Finally arrived to LA, and he found a job working in a big newspaper, and he was a printer. Now, back then, being a printer was a very classic job for deaf people because working in the printing press was so loud and it was such a noisy environment that hearing people didn't want to work there. So a lot of printing presses had a good number of deaf gentlemen working there, and it all worked out for everyone, actually. And he was happy with his life in LA. He kind of also was working on cars as a mechanic, and he liked his exercise. And one day he went to the Deaf Club in Southern California, and he met this very beautiful woman who was visiting from London. And how she had found her way to that deaf club, he didn't know, but basically what had happened was my grandmother had just become very bored hanging out with hearing people, all the people, her sisters, her sister's friends. So she found a way to find other deaf people. And so they met at the Deaf Club, and after 2 weeks, my grandfather proposed to my grandmother, and she said yes. But first I have to just go back to London. And so she went back on the boat, got all of her things, came back to New York, then took another train back to California. But what happened was that she lost her wedding silverware from the Saunders family in a taxi cab in New York. And she, for the rest of her life, as my mother knew very well, was very upset about this fact. The last picture of the top right is my grandparents' wedding photo. And my mother was the only child because my grandmother was, quite old by the time they got married. She was 39 when she had my mom, and that was in the 1950s, and so it was a lot tougher than it would be today. Can you push the next slide, please? Where was I? Oh, right, no. Okay, so my mom, right. So my mom grew up in Southern California, and she always kept in touch with, I guess, our English side of the family. And when my mother was pregnant with her first child, who is standing before you, so when my mom was 9 months pregnant with me, she got a phone call that her father had just passed away. And this was in Southern California, and my mother at the time was living in Northern California. And my mother was very worried because she thought she's not going to be able to go to her father's funeral because she's so pregnant, and she's the only child, and so you can imagine this was a very, very important moment. So the doctor decided reluctantly to let her go on the plane, but insisted that she fly back the very next day. So when she arrived in Southern California, of course, she immediately started going into labor that night. And I kind of, the end of this part of the story is that I was born at the exact same moment my grandfather was being put into the ground. And his name was Louis, and my name is Louise. His name sign looks like this. Yeah? And how you sign girl is like this. So my name sign is basically a combination of his name and girl. And I'm always very proud that name was passed down to me. So here I am in London. I moved here about 8 years ago and really got to know my English side of the family. And my grandmother started getting on in her years in Southern California. And she started missing Europe and the UK very much. And she wanted to come back for a visit one last time. But she was kind of ill at the time. She went to the doctor, and the doctor said, yeah, of course, you can go. And so she came and visited myself and my cousins here, went to her old home in London, which she's standing in front of the street there. And here's me with my grandmother when she came to visit a few years back. She was kind of in and out of reality at this point. And one day we were walking down the street, and I got a taxi for us. And because she couldn't really walk, and I was very nervous even taking the bus with her, so we got a taxi, and we got into the taxi, and she said, everyone loves you so much, Louise. You have friends everywhere. Every time you stop in the street, your friends stop and give us rides. So it was actually a really beautiful time that I had with my grandmother when she was here in London. And actually, as soon as she went back to Southern California, her dementia got much worse, and she died soon after. And that's my family story. Thanks a lot. Thanks.